First off, I love my kids.
This is Learning to Dad.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
With Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm gonna have fun, and you're gonna have fun.
This is Learning to Dad. I am Tyler Ross, and my guest today is Ike Broaddus. Ike, along with his wife Julie and partner Charles, opened Old Busthead Brewery in 2014 in Vint Hill, Virginia, where he once served on the Economic Development Authority for the old Army base. He's also a real estate investor. Among his projects include a massive renovation of a 60,000 square foot former military building into office and retail use. In the late 90s, Ike was an owner of a company that participated in a 3-branch merger of Century 21 Real Estate Brokerage offices that became a $500 million, that's $500 million power brokerage in Northern Virginia, for which Ike served as the president. Ike is also the CEO of Guru Networks. He's an avid cyclist. He's a bassist, guitarist, and vocalist in the band Offstar. And I'm told he once ate a golf ball-sized chunk of wasabi for $50. And all of this, as far as I'm concerned, is the tip of the iceberg. I've known you for maybe 8 years. Ike is certainly one of my favorite people. The whiner in the background is Vixen, Ike's Chihuahua, who you may hear jingling walking around. And someone that I look up to generally and just have fun with is Ike Broaddus. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, what a fun introduction that is. And just one correction, it was $100 for the wasabi. It was two guys, each of whom put up $50. So I wouldn't do it for 50, but 100, it was worth it.
It seems to be a trend. Your daughter Callie told me that you also bet them $50 to jump into a river at one point.
I did do that, yes. It was a, my wife said it was a stupid idea. It was our backyard, and it had rained and slushed and melted, so it was basically 32.5-degree water that had little icebergs and things floating in it. It was about a foot deep, and I told the kids I would pay them each $50 if they all went in, and Callie was the first one in, and then Coleman and his friend Dan reluctantly went in, but yep, they each got $50. And the lesson I wanted to teach them was, no matter how scary something is, it's temporary. Yeah. And they could get it. I knew that nothing would kill them in that water. And I was told later on that maybe something could have hypothermia. But they survived, and they grew, and they learned how to push through their wall of fear and their wall of pain, and they loved it.
That's fantastic. How old were they when that happened?
Probably high school age, I think. Yeah, old enough to survive a few seconds in freezing water.
Had that opportunity been presented to you, would you have held out for $100?
I think, it all depends on your age, and your financial wherewithal. When I was in high school, $50 would have been the world to me, and I would have done it, I'm sure. I probably could have been had for 10. So,
would you have found that you would have jumped in like Callie did, or hesitated like Coleman?
I probably was not as brave as Callie. She is the bravest person I know. She'll do anything.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah, I'm probably more like Coleman was.
Yeah. And so in your professional life, you seem to be very, I'm not going to say risk adverse. What's the opposite of risk adverse? Willingness to put it up on the table. The things that I talked about in the intro, can you kind of walk us through those kind of professional experiences, building a brokerage, merging a brokerage, starting a brewery, anything that kind of resonates, jumps out to you?
Yeah, boy, that's a wide open question.
Yeah, I want to see where you go with it.
Yeah, I think that the way I look at risk is this. If the worst thing that can happen to me is I lose all of my money, mm-hmm. but if I still have my health and my family and my friendships and my honor, I feel good about who I am and how I contribute to society, I don't think I've lost that much. So I'm comfortable putting money at risk. That's not a big deal. When it comes to, I would not put my life at risk. The idea of jumping out of a plane, for instance, that's not me. In terms of risking getting in front of a crowd to play music, what's the worst that can happen is I look like an idiot. No big deal. And in terms of starting a business, to me, I don't see failure as an option. And as you know, I have I have certainly had my failures. You learn from those, and maybe the business failures cost you no more than a college education, but you get much more value than you got out of your college education. So, some things cost money and you learn from them, and some things it turns out you guessed right and they work out well and you're rewarded, and those feel a little better.
You touched on so many things that I'm excited to expand on, but to stick with the idea of risk, of course, doing a little bit of research, Callie asked me to tell you, or told me to ask you about the whole Disney America idea.
Okay.
And a winter that you couldn't afford to buy shoes.
Yes, it's true. It sounds outlandish, and looking back, it is. I question whether or not how accurate that story is, but it is true that there was a winter. It was probably 1991 or 92 or 93, where Callie was a baby, and we had launched our real estate company. We expanded the real estate company, and we expanded it the day that Saddam entered Kuwait. I believe that was August of 91. And that moment, our second office that we had just bought that day sold no houses for the next 2 months. The first office we had, which was already a very successful office, it lost 90% of its production for the next couple of months.
Wow.
And so I got a very quick lesson in how reserves are important and how quickly the tide can turn on you. Over the course of that next year or two, the real estate recession kicked in full swing. Our bank called our note due, and we were suddenly fighting just to survive financially. And that went on for 2 or 3 years. And one of those winters, I remember carrying Callie down the sidewalk as a 2 or 3 year old or whatever she was. And it was winter, there was snow on the ground. And the reason I had to carry her is because she didn't have any shoes. And I look back and think that sounds crazy, but I think it's an accurate story.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So leading up to having Callie, had you found a little bit of success professionally, and then things went
Sure.
sideways?
Yeah,
Where were you
absolutely.
in your professional life when you had your baby?
So when I started off in the car business, and I did 6 years working my way up from salesman to business manager and sales manager and general manager, and ultimately that was my stepfather's company. And working as the owner's kid, the challenge there was when I would go into a new store, I'd have to prove to the people there that I wasn't there because I was the owner's kid. I was there because I was good at what I did, and I would turn this store into something good. And I got tired of proving myself over and over again. And I think to some extent I questioned myself, how much of the opportunities I was given was simply because I was the owner's kid versus I was good at what I did.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to go break off on my own. And I think the greatest motivator I ever got in life was when I went in to tell my stepfather that I had decided I wanted to leave his business and go out and do real estate. And he looked at me and he kind of chuckled and he said, well, most people fail in real estate. And when you do, there will always be a job for you here.
Wow.
And I said, wow, if you don't think I'm going to succeed out there, then maybe it shook me, it rattled me.
Yeah.
And I walked out thinking, failure in real estate is not an option.
Yeah.
It motivated me like nothing else. And maybe like the old Johnny Cash song, Boy Named Sue, I knew that you'd get tough or die, and maybe that's what he was doing for me.
Yeah.
So I went out and worked 100 hours a week until I got to the point where I was very successful as an agent. I tried to get into commercial real estate early on, but the 2 or 3 commercial brokers that I interviewed with wouldn't hire me because they said I didn't have any experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sold houses, and in my first year, I think I sold 40 houses.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was the year that our son Coleman was born. And I did that in spite of taking off 2 months to be with Julie and our son in those first magical moments. And then after that experience, I switched over to Remax and I hired an assistant and then had a small team and did all that. back when people weren't really doing that.
Right.
And after 3 years, I just decided to parlay that into a real estate office. And it was 1990, and the market had started to turn south a bit. And there was a real estate office, an ERA office, that was selling. They were closing their doors. I went to them and offered them $5,000, and in return for that $5,000, I bought all of their furniture, all their equipment, and took over their lease. And it was, I probably got $100,000 worth of stuff for $5,000, and off and running we were. And we developed our own logo, our own brand identity. And but within about 6 months, I realized that consumers still could not figure out who we were. We seemed like a little nothing to folks. And so I bought a Century 21 franchise on that office, and then very quickly became one of the top Century 21 offices in the Mid-Atlantic. And they started bringing me opportunities. When Century 21 would close down or was not succeeding, they'd come to me and say, "This owner wants to sell. Would you be interested in taking it?" And we, over time, this is a massive simplification of what really happened, but over time, we were able to grow that into a 14 office operation with 400 people. And it took about a little more than a decade to really hit our trajectory. It's funny, as an agent, I was making great money. And then when I started the business, and suddenly I didn't have time to sell houses anymore. I was too busy recruiting agents, training agents, managing the problems that an office has. And it took me several years, probably 5 years, to get back to the point where I was making as much money as I was as an agent.
Wow.
And it was during those early years with the office that Callie experienced her no-shoe ordeal. And when Julie and I first launched the office, things went very well and we needed more space. So we, within a year, took on some additional space, and that's when the market really tanked after that. But we were so cash strapped when we took on this new office that we couldn't finish building out the space. Mm-hmm. And so Coleman, our son, who was probably 3 at the time, and Callie, who was a baby, we would bring them with us while we were in there building it out ourselves. We were doing our own painting and trim and things like that. And we had one conference room that had we couldn't afford the furniture for it. So we brought in a little 12-inch TV that you could stick a tape in and put a beanbag chair on the floor, and we would put a kid's tape in there, and Coleman Callie would watch the same stupid movie over and over and over while Julie and I were painting the office and installing the furniture and things like that. So those early years, it was 100 hours a week or whatever it took to make it work.
So what was Julie doing at the time, and how did that going from really kicking butt as an agent and to being a broker and recruiting and putting in the 100-hour weeks, like how does that affect how'd that change your family dynamic from it's all good to strapped?
Great question. And I think Julie's involvement was critical at every launch. And so we had multiple launches along the way. The first launch, when I became an agent, Julie became an agent the same week, and we both got licensed and started selling houses together and simultaneously got married and pregnant. It all happened within 3 months. We were licensed, married, and pregnant all within 3 months of one another. And so she was there full tilt until Coleman was born. And Coleman, when he came along, I think Julie was showing houses at 9 months pregnant, and thankfully he was a week late. And so once he was born, I don't think she did any more deals after that. So she was there for the launch, but then became a full-time mom. And then when we started the real estate company, she came in and worked to help me launch the real estate company. We did that very much together. We were both there all the time. And it was probably about the time, maybe a year into it, she backed off because 2 small kids is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so once we were up and running, she was a full-time mom, and I was able, because of her awesome ability. She is the best mom on this earth, and I think Coleman and Callie would attest to that. She made it easy for me to work crazy hours and know that everything was good.
So how was her approach different than yours when it comes to
180 degrees, night and day.
In both parenting and professionally?
Parenting, we really supported each other. Even though our styles are different, we were very much supportive of the other. So I think that, like any child, you benefit. Our kids certainly benefited from the fact that I was different than she and she was different than I. But in terms of the entrepreneurial approach, yeah, I was the one who always had the new crazy idea. I wanted to go do something and take the risk. And she was always the one who said, but life is good. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
And I would say, because it's interesting. It's fun. And maybe life could be better. And so usually she was initially reluctant, recalcitrant. Is that the right word? She would say no. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, she would make me prove my model out. She would make me go through the hard steps, answer the hard questions to ensure that I had thought this through. And then once she knew that there was no way to stop me from wanting to do this, she would become a supporter and she'd be in full tilt.
Yeah.
So that was true when we became real estate agents. She left what would have been a great career in the buying offices of the Hecht retail company. She had a degree from Duke, and she was in the management buying office in the junior manager program or management training program. And she left that to do the real estate thing. And then she reluctantly agreed to starting the real estate office. And years later, she reluctantly agreed to growing into multiple offices. And then years later, she reluctantly agreed to starting the software thing. And then years later, she reluctantly agreed to doing the brewery thing. So, yeah. And there were probably other things along the way. But once she agreed, she was in full tilt.
Well, I wonder if she reluctantly agreed to marry you. I was told to ask
Yes.
about when you met at a car dealership. So can you tell me a little bit about
Oh, boy.
you met at a car dealership?
I was the general sales manager of Brown's Arlington Honda, and it was the summer of 1985. And Julie came in to buy a car. And my job at that point was not to sell cars. My job was to manage the sales managers who managed the salespeople who sold the cars. But every once in a while, a sales manager would get involved and take a TO, a turnover. And as general sales manager, I didn't take TOs, but I saw her walk in the showroom, and I paged the sales agent the salesperson who was working with her. His name was Paul Foley, and I said, "Paul Foley, please call my extension." And he called me, and I said, "Paul, I'd like to take a TO on this customer." And he said, "I totally understand." And so after he had shown her the car and she wasn't buying that day, she was going to just think about it, he brought her into my office and introduced her, and we sat and chatted. And ostensibly, I was hoping to, my job was to sell her a car, but I really fell in love that moment. And I think she did too. There was a spark. There was some magic. We both had other relationships, but we both felt like something much better, a higher potential was there. But there was an adversarial relationship because we didn't have the car she wanted. She placed an order and left me a deposit for a car that would be in sometime in the next month or two. And then Honda, although they built her car, the truckers that deliver those cars went on strike. And so weeks went by and her car didn't show up. And other dealers started telling her that they shouldn't trust me, that I would never sell her a car as cheaply as I did. And I did. I broke all the rules. I wanted that deal so bad. I went way down to a very low profit margin. And she believed the other dealers and was convinced that I had no intention of selling her that car, even though I had every intention and I was just waiting for it to arrive. So she gave me an ultimatum one day and said, if that car is not there by Thursday, I want my money back and I'm buying another car from a competitor down the street. Thursday arrived, and the car was not there yet, even though I had a bill of lading showing that the car was on its way. It was on a truck finally, and cars were rolling out of Marysville, Ohio finally. And I called her. I said, the car is on its way. She said, well, if it's not there today, I'm buying this other car. She left, and she went over to our competitor, Bill Page, that evening, bought another car they happened to have in stock. It was a much more expensive car, and it wasn't as nice. And so she bought that car and drove it over, and as she arrived, the truck pulled up with her car on it. And so I said, I understand you already bought this other car and you're not changing your mind, but I want you to know that I was honest. Here is the serial number to your car, and there's your car on that truck. And she says, yeah, that's great, but it's too late. I want my money back. And I said, okay, I get that. I went downstairs to the office, got a check and brought it up, and I started writing the check, and I realized I had some leverage. And so I said, I'll sign this check with your refund if you promise to spend it on me for dinner tonight. And she said, sign the check and then we'll talk about it. So I realized I didn't have as much leverage as I thought. I gave her the check and she said, fair enough. Where do you want to go to dinner? And I said, actually, if you'll go where I want to go, then I'll buy. And so we went to a little French restaurant called Chalet de la Paix. And it was just a few blocks from the dealership. And it was a place that I went a lot, so much so that I had an account there. And they knew me really well. And that really impressed her. And so we walked in. She spoke French, and she enjoyed talking to the waiters in French. And I got escargot. And I mean, it was just a lovely evening. But mostly, I think we talked for 3 hours and realized at the end of that we had both found our perfect matches. At least I felt that way. And so that was on a Thursday evening, and we agreed that we should do that again the following Thursday when she had an early evening and I could get off. And so we agreed next Thursday was going to be our next date. So she comes to the dealership, she walks into my office, and I was so proud of what I had done. I was so certain that I had met my future wife. So I had written on my calendar, I had chosen a date the following June 18th it was, and I wrote, close the dealership, Ike's wedding day. So she walked in my office and I said, flip the calendar over to June 18th. And she did, and she saw it. She said, Ike's wedding day? What? Are you engaged? And I said, well, no, that's my wedding to you. And yeah, it scared her away for a while because I was so confident that we were right for each other. And she was so sure that was ridiculous.
Well, to show it to her right away.
Yeah, I probably should have held back for a few more days, but it was perfect. I mean, it's been, it was a match made in heaven. We had both had multiple relationships and knew what we were looking for, and I got exactly what I was looking for. I don't think she did get what she was looking for, but I'm happy with her decision.
That is so cool. When I met Sarah, our first date, I went home and wrote her a letter. And when we got engaged, she said, you know what we should do for our wedding day? Instead of giving each other gifts, we should give each other a letter.
Ooh.
And so 4 years later, I pulled this letter out and handed it to her. And it was probably one of the coolest things, one of the most romantic things I'd ever done by accident.
Did you give her the letter the first time when you met her?
No.
So you held this letter in your hip pocket, waiting for that moment.
Dear Sarah, just finished our first date at the Virginian.
Oh.
I think you're, et cetera, and so on. And
I would have married you if you had done that for me. Wow, that is so awesome.
I wrote a letter the first time we met. I haven't given it to you yet. Well, that's really a lot of fun. She came around and you guys got married, and shortly thereafter had kids. Like, how did kids impact your life? Like, do you remember the way you felt when Julie said, "It's on, we're having a kid"?
Oh yeah, I said, "Awesome." I mean,
Were you trying to have children, or just
No, we weren't married yet.
the 3 months? Yeah.
We were dating, but we were very much in love. And she said, "You know what? I'm pregnant." And I didn't hesitate. I said, "That's awesome. Let's get married." And she said, "Perfect. Let's do it."
Amazing.
Because we knew we were getting married. It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
It was that good. And it's funny. I think even at our first date, we talked about what the names of our children would be, and Coleman's name was decided on our first date.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was never any question. It was just, maybe her getting pregnant was the impetus we needed to get married. Otherwise, maybe we wouldn't have.
Yeah.
maybe we would have coasted along happily dating for the rest of our lives, because there's never a convenient time to have kids. And so, sometimes it's better when it's thrust on you.
So what changed most by adding a kid into the familial dynamic or your professional dynamic? Like, was it time or your world perspective or your relationship with your wife? Like, what are the impacts that, a new dad might not see coming that you would go?
Right. I would say it was all the above and money.
Yeah.
It was, certainly time, because you don't want to miss those precious early years. And in fact, as life goes on, you realize all of it is precious.
Mm-hmm.
Coleman's now 31, and when he is home visiting, I don't want to go to work. I want to be there every second.
Yeah.
When he was a baby, I didn't want to miss his first anything. I didn't want to miss any of the interactions. And with Callie as well, you want to be there. Every kid is different.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to experience the magic of this new child. But B, you also want to make sure that you imprint and influence the outcome, because you want your kid to be happy and successful, and you want them, you hope that you've improved on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
My father used to say, there's no sense in having a kid if you can't improve on yourself. And certainly I was very aware that there was plenty of room for improvement here. So, but
he pointed at himself for listeners. He was pointing at himself.
But there, in order to have that outcome be real, you got to invest time. And you hope that what you're doing is investing time, ensuring that the mistakes you made, or that your parents made, or that your grandparents made, or somehow that you've learned about, that you don't make the same mistakes, and that you somehow help your kids figure out how to steer away from those mistakes as well. So, yes, definitely time was a biggie. Money, it costs a lot to have a kid. Mm-hmm. Not just what it takes to, feed and clothe and house the child and educate the child, but it's also the lost income that somebody is going to bear for being there with the kid. And then the relationship with your spouse, absolutely. There is no question about it that after Coleman was born, I became number 2 in our house, in Julie's mind, after Coleman. And after Callie was born, I was number 3. And after Finley was born, I was number 4. So, and that's okay, because that's the way it goes, and that was part of the wonder and the beauty. And that's why she's an awesome mom.
So with Coleman and Callie out of the house now, do you feel like you're number 1 again?
No, now we've got this brewery, and it's number 1 for sure. And we have Vixen, and I think Vixen ranks higher than both the brewery and me.
Yeah, my dog is definitely ranked higher than me, as are my kids.
Yeah. And that may be the hardest thing to get used to as a spouse, as a husband, is knowing that there's nothing you can do to be as adorable to your wife as those kids are.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough one. And then in terms of the fourth element, I think you mentioned was your professional status. And
mm-hmm.
Because you have less time to invest in your business, to some extent you become a better time manager. You know how precious time is, and especially as the kids got a little older, when Coleman was old enough to play sports, I wanted to be there, and I wanted to volunteer as a coach. So I coached him in soccer. I coached him in softball, or whatever that little T-ball was.
Yeah.
I hated playing the game as a kid. I hated baseball, and I never had played soccer in my life. But the coach, the when we signed him up, they said, if you want your son to play on a team, you'll have to be a coach because we don't have enough coaches. I said, okay, I'll learn. I can stay. I'm better than a 3-year-old or 4-year-old. I know I can do that. So I learned and became a licensed soccer coach. And I think I coached for 5 or 6 or 7 seasons, and he ultimately was too good for me and got into better teams. But when he graduated high school, I realized I had been to over 500 games in his career.
That's amazing.
And so, yeah, it was, I think having my own business afforded me the opportunity to be flexible. I feel bad for folks who are in jobs where they can't take off to go see their son's soccer game or their daughter's soccer game, or in Callie's case, she got out of soccer pretty quickly and got into horses. And you'll spend 4 hours on a Saturday at a horse show so that you can see 60 seconds of your child going across a jump. But it was the most thrilling 60 seconds that you could ever imagine. And I think I watched Callie get thrown into every kind of jump. She got thrown over and over and over and over. And every time I thought she was going to have had every bone in her body crushed, I watched her get dragged by horses as her foot got caught in a stirrup at 20 miles an hour across the ring. I watched her go head first into jumps, and every time she got back up and she kept on going. And I thought, you know what? And to this day, I'm convinced that those experiences made her strong, made her tough, made her resilient, just like soccer did for Coleman. And then Finley had different set of challenges. She had illnesses that made her strong and tough and resilient. And as she used to like to say, that which does not kill us makes us stronger.
Yeah.
And it does. And so you being there for your kids and helping them feel okay through those moments of grit and toughness and resilience. Just like when you have a little baby and that baby falls down, if you go, oh my gosh, are you okay? The baby's probably going to cry.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, how you doing? The baby is probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so how you react to your kids' experiences teaches them how to react. And so I think that being there is so important. And it's not only because it helps them grow, but selfishly, it's the joy of living vicariously and of seeing your kids have such fun. Or go through miserable experiences, whatever it is they're going through.
Yeah.
But to watch those experiences is a powerful thing. And I'm so grateful to have been able to be there. And I do wish everybody could have the opportunity. I don't know how you do it unless you are entrepreneurial and you can do your own thing.
So that kind of answers my next question is like, I'm going to ask you to answer it again.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for, say, a younger you or a coming soon to be father to kind of prepare themselves to create that time? Or, do you start practicing time management now? Or do you find it, we're all looking for fulfillment, and spending time with our kids is it. And
Yes.
Nobody dies wishing that they had worked more.
Right.
So, like, is there anything in particular, either something specific or just like a general philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most important thing is having kids when you can financially take care of those kids, and where you are financially in a position where if you want to take time off, you can.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've seen lots of, whether it's single income, single parents, or dual income families where because the jobs didn't pay enough, or for whatever reason, both parents had to work all the time, and they're not able to be there for their kids. And that's the reality for most people. Most kids are raised in that environment. Most parents are in that reality. And so, I mean, the only way to avoid it is before you have a kid, do what you can to set yourself up financially or professionally so that you have some flexibility and that you have the ability to withstand a surprise if your child is ill. And I'll give you a very real example. Our daughter Finley, who was diagnosed with cancer when she was 17 in her senior year in high school, and who passed away 6 months later. The fact that we were able to drop everything, and Julie was able to be in the hospital with her every day and around the clock, 24 hours a day, from Christmas Day until June 2nd when she passed away. So many families don't have that luxury. And we were blessed and grateful that we were able to do that, and that we had the financial resources to be able to ensure that we had the best care, to be able to ensure that we could take the time and do the things that would make her last months as special as we could make them. And so many folks, it may not be as tragic as losing a child, but your child gets sick and they need you to stay home. Your child is in the hospital, and there are lots of folks whose children are for whatever reason, they're not, they need extra attention. A lot of people have children who have some sort of learning disability or some other disability that requires full-time parenting the rest of their lives. And you look at those folks and you think, your heart goes out to them because you know that how you would do the same thing in their position. You'd do whatever you have to do.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the means, if you don't have some money set aside for the unexpected emergency, if you don't have the professional situation to be able to have flexibility, if you're working for a job, hourly or salary, whatever, ensuring that job has the benefit package that gives you some, certainly health care at a minimum. You got to have good health insurance and some flexibility, and something that the company you're working for has the compassion that if you need to be there for your kids, that you have the ability to do that and it's not going to bankrupt you. I think those are critical elements. So, you see so often kids having kids before they have a career, before they have any bank account, before they own a house, and it just makes it so much harder to get to a point of stability.
Yeah.
And that's assuming their kids are healthy. If you have something go wrong, all bets are off. So yeah, I'd say in terms of preparing for parenthood, get to a point where you can handle it financially. Buy your house, so that and I could recommend a great agent here in Warrenton. But buy your first house and have a few months of cash cushion in the bank. Make sure you've got great health insurance, and then go for it. And not everybody's going to get to go to every soccer game. I was pretty lucky.
Yeah.
But you can certainly arrange things where you can be there for the magical moments.
So in additional to financial preparation for having a kid, if you don't mind talking about maybe giving advice to a parent who might be managing the experience of having a child that's ill and without upside, like, is there anything that you could share for a father or a mother for that?
Absolutely. I couldn't have told you this before we went through it, but somehow Julie knew when the diagnosis came in, and we knew. There was a very small chance that Finley might find a way through this cancer, but no one had ever survived cholangiocarcinoma before, and there was very little reason to think that she would. But somehow I held on to hope. That was my optimism. Julie said to me, let's make sure that this experience is a beautiful end to a beautiful life. And so, I think what we learned is make every day matter, right? You've got time left. You've got, whether it's days or weeks or months, enjoy those days. So, and Finley, thank God, she was so strong through this. She understood that completely. She did not dwell for a second on her diagnosis. She said, let's go out and smell the roses. Even though she spent those last 5 months in a hospital, she would get up every day in the children's ward at Johns Hopkins, and even though she was weak and barely able to walk on some days, she would make the rounds and she'd go say hi to all the other little kids in the ward. And if there was a light on in an empty room, she'd turn the light off. If there was anything she could do to set an example of how to be more environmentally friendly or to create a system that was more sustainable, she would do it. And I realized every little moment you're alive, you can make a difference in the lives of other people, and you can get some joy out of that moment. And so, yeah, if people are out there and if their child has an illness, if their child has a terminal illness, knowing that that child is still alive today, and that child needs your love and needs to share your joy so that they can be joyful, that is a powerful opportunity. You've got time left with them. And so we learned to get the joy out of every moment. We learned to get the joy out of every day and to not think about or worry about tomorrow. Let's just focus on what we can get out of today. And Finley and Julie were much better at that than I was. And to this day, it's hard to think about, but I think you can take those moments of adversity and you can make something special out of them. So, yeah, to those parents who are enduring the most awful thing a parent should ever have to endure, know that you can still get joy out of the moment, out of the moments you have, and there's no reason to not smile and laugh and tell a joke and watch a silly movie and do silly things and have fun. You should enjoy it as if you have another 50 years or 100 years left, because none of us knows for sure whether we have tomorrow. We know we have right now, and so why not enjoy it, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Yeah. People are sometimes afraid, and I would tell everybody this: if you know somebody whose child has died, don't be afraid to talk about it, because, and maybe not everybody is this way, but for me, it's a way to keep Finley alive in my heart, so that I love talking about her. I don't want to remember the bad moments, but I want to remember the good moments, and so talking about them is the best way to do that. And if somehow it inspires somebody else to enjoy a moment they might otherwise not have enjoyed, or inspires somebody to go out and make good use of their remaining moments on the earth, then that's good.
And the bracelet on your wrist.
Yes.
Can you tell me about that a little bit? Tell us about that a little bit.
Yes, this is. It says Finley's Fight on one side. On the other side, it says Finley's Green Leap Forward. When she was diagnosed, a good friend of hers had, from her high school, had also had cancer and had survived it. And she was talking to that friend, and she said, people are going to send you candy and stuffed animals and flowers and all of this stuff. And she said, I don't want that stuff. I want people to do something positive for the world. And when you send flowers, you're cutting flowers, and that's an environmental negative. And they probably are traveling in a plane 1,500 miles to get to me. So don't cut flowers and send them to me. Don't send me candy, because sugar is what cancers thrive on. I'm not going to eat any candy. I'm going to give this thing the best chance I've got. And don't send me stuff. I don't need stuff. So she said, instead, I'd like people to go out and plant a tree. And maybe that'll make a teeny bit of difference for climate change. This is something people can do. And of course, she recognized that people felt the need to do something to express their love for her and their sorrow for what she's going through, their sympathy. And so when she put that call out on Facebook, she said, please don't send me stuff. Please plant a tree and take a picture of it and post it.
Yeah.
And
that's amazing.
So people started doing that, and we found that people loved the opportunity to do something meaningful. And so over the course of the next month or so, we started seeing people posting and planting trees all over the country and in places all around the world. And even people who didn't know Finley were doing this.
Yeah.
And so she said, you know what? What about those folks? And I think people even inquired, if I live in a condo, I don't have any place to plant a tree. She said, let's let them donate to a fund. And so we came up with this idea that by her 18th birthday, if we could raise $18,000, that was our goal, that we would be able to present this to Finley, and that she could choose some funds out there that do good work towards climate change. And she found 2 funds, and she researched this, spent a lot of time researching which organizations did good work towards, and as it turns out, it wasn't just climate change. It was they're doing things that impact climate change and also impact the lives of people directly. And she found the Capon Institute in West Virginia, and she found the Greenbelt Movement in Kenya. Both of these organizations planted trees and did things to help kids in need or women in need in these areas. And by her 18th birthday, we had told her we hoped to raise $18,000, so she was planning on making some grants. It turns out that people donated $67,000 by her birthday.
Wow.
And so this Green Leap Forward Fund is the residual of that effort. And to this day, it lives on. And Finley knew it was going to live. She wanted it to live on. And so she appointed 5 people as an advisory board. One of our close friends was NASA's chief scientist. She's on the board.
Wow.
And her daughter was Finley's best friend. And so, Finley knew who she wanted to help direct this in the future when she was gone. And now the fund, every year we continue to do, we have an annual 5K race. We do a day of giving, and then we have a number of people who, family and friends who give repetitively. And the fund now has $400,000.
No kidding.
And it is giving out $50,000 a year in grants to nonprofits who are doing things to make the world better. So we give money to the Rainforest Trust. This past year got $10,000. Cool Earth got $10,000. They both do things in the tropics to protect rainforests. Finley's original grantees are the Greenbelt Movement in Kenya and Capon Institute. In this past year, they continued. We give them $10,000 a year as well. The Capon Institute was just awarded the very first Arbor Day Foundation Award for trees being planted in headwaters and making an impact cleaning water for streams downstream. And we went to the award presentation, and they said that Finley was their inspiration.
No kidding. Yeah.
Yes, they said Finley was their inspiration. And it was really a touching moment. We met their team, and you realize that these little things, Finley didn't have a lot of time to do this, but she did what she could. And she knew that if people would give what they can and do what they can, it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. And we got to see it there. And with the Greenbelt Movement, they called us this year or sent us an email and said, we want to honor Finley by planting 18 trees in a Hope Park.
Wow.
So we're going to travel to Kenya next year and celebrate the planting of these 18 trees.
It's beautiful.
So yeah, every day I wake up and put this on, and I promised Finley that I would spend every moment I had and that I could fighting climate change.
Yeah.
And that's what that's about.
That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I wish I had gotten to meet her very much.
She was a pretty special kid, and Coleman and Callie both know that Finley was our best kid. So there's no hiding it. People say, which child do you like the best? Finley was it.
Finley.
And Coleman and Callie acknowledge that for the right reasons, she was the most loved. And she was pretty cool.
The image I have is that picture of her leaping into the air, and it just speaks volumes about the energy that she has, and it's everlasting. It's really wonderful. To ask you one more thing about that, any parent grieving now who's lost a child, do you have any advice for them that seek religion or a friend or a cause?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably no one answer to that, but all of those things can be helpful. We resisted when Finley passed away. A group called Life with Cancer came to us and offered free counseling, grief counseling, and we said, I don't think we need that. We're okay. And then 2 years later, Julie was diagnosed with cancer and went through a year of treatment, and thankfully she appears to be good and healthy now. And Life with Cancer again came to us and said, grief counseling, because even though Julie is surviving, there's still grief. Mm-hmm. And maybe you're not over the grief from Finley yet. And we said, what have we got to lose? Let's do it. And it has been a wonderful thing to sit down with a professional counselor and talk through what you're feeling and how these things that you've experienced may be impacting you. And Vixen is over there just crying away. Come on, come here.
Did you find as a male in this world that kind of defines men as being macho or unable or unwilling to share feelings, did you find that was a barrier opening up to a counselor? Do you feel like anything that you would recommend to people who might be struggling with, that's for people that aren't strong, that's for weak people?
That's an interesting question. I'm not afflicted with that. As you can tell, I cry easily. I'm not afraid to share or express or show my feelings at all. And I think if anything, Julie may be stronger in that regard than I am. So I think that, for everyone, whether it's a grief counselor, or whether it is religion, and we are not religious folks, so that's not an avenue we explored, but for some people that might be the best avenue. But if you can have somebody who is objective that you can speak with, if it's a professional counselor or a pastor or a friend, it's helpful. In fact, we've been able to talk, a number of friends who have experienced losses through cancer or otherwise, and you find many of them reaching out because they experienced it first and they want to help you through it. And it's funny, we initially really didn't want that. We didn't want to be identified as the people who lost a daughter. That was not who we wanted to be. Julie does not want to be thought of as a cancer survivor herself. She will say today she is a cancer survivor in that she survived the death of her daughter from cancer. But and I'd say that was certainly a much more traumatic experience for me as well. But I think that now, 4.5 years later, we are able to talk about it more easily. Yeah. Maybe. I still cry. I promised Finley, a couple times she caught me crying, and I promised her that I would always finish. I said, you can't stop me from crying. It's who I am. It's what I'm going to do. And I said, but I will promise you that I will always finish every cry with a smile. And so that's what I do. I find those memories and I think about them, and I think about the good that Finley's life has created for me and for others she touched. And I use that to draw a smile somehow. And I think that for everybody who experiences grief, there is some opportunity for good to come out of it. But it may you may have to dig deep to find it, and you may have to talk to a lot of people. But don't be afraid to talk when you're ready, and don't be afraid to open up, and don't be afraid to let the tears fall, because you know what? That's what happens.
Yeah.
And then don't be afraid to be happy again. That's, I think, really important.
Absolutely.
The person you lost would want you to be happy, and you owe it to them to do that.
Amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And one of the best things I've ever heard is finish every cry with a smile. That's wonderful.
Got to do it.
Well,
And I think I've heard Julie say before, the thing that saved her was having something that she could dig into and be committed to, and that was a brewery.
yeah.
We opened our brewery, started brewing our first batch the week that Finley was diagnosed. And so there was no turning back. We had our life savings invested in this thing, and we had to keep it going. And after Finley died, Julie came back to work, and she, put her head down and basically has worked 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, every week from August of 2014 to today, just making sure that the brewery runs well. And we've split up the brewery into Charles's portion, which is production, my portion, which is distribution, and Julie's, which is everything else, which is basically everything.
Including managing you too, probably.
Including managing the two of us. She runs the tap room, she does the branding, she runs the office, she runs all the merchandise and the website and the social media and the advertising. That's all her thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she has been able to really put her energy and her commitment into this brewery, and I think it's been a godsend. And she'd be the first to tell you that.
So I want to jump into a little bit of a lightning round. It's not so
Okay.
much lightning
All
round,
right.
but just kind of quick
Bring it
questions for
on.
quick answers. So what's an attribute of yours that as a father you are proud to have?
Ugh. An attribute, honesty.
Honesty. How's that suited you as a father and for the benefit of your kids?
I've never kept anything from them, aside from maybe the truth about Santa and the Easter Bunny when they were very little. But for instance, when Coleman and Callie were probably 2 and 5 years old, and the economy was tanking, and we were on the verge of losing our real estate company, and Callie didn't have shoes, and our house was in foreclosure. I mean, everything was falling apart. We would sit at the kitchen table and tell the kids exactly what was going on, and maybe it went on till Coleman was 6 or 7, and Callie was 3 or 4 or 5, and it was a rough several years. And what I found was, in us opening up honestly to the kids, we got better advice from them than we did from any adult.
Never occurred to me.
It is mind-boggling how they have no preconditions, they have no jaundiced views, they have no experiences that teach them to be afraid of money, and so they talk about it, and they can talk about it in very clear terms. And then we would go in and talk with our advisors, whether it's accountants or attorneys or other adults, and you would realize, wow, that what Coleman and Callie said at dinner last night was a lot smarter than what these folks are telling me today. So, it's honesty about money. I would say, if you want your kids to be financially smart, start when they're 2 and help them understand your money. Don't be afraid to tell them whether you're broke or whether you're a billionaire. Help your kids with complete honesty know and understand everything that's going on. Don't be afraid to share the truth with them.
That's awesome.
Whether it's honesty about past experiences. I never hid the fact from my kids that I dropped out of college, or that I smoked pot, or that I had other relationships prior to their mother. I think honesty was, they knew that if they asked me a question, they'd get the truth, and they knew, and to this day they know that. They know that I have never been dishonest with them. So I think that's a pretty nice asset.
So what are 2 or 3 things that you think would make up a super dad?
Oof.
You can use honesty if you want
Okay,
to.
yeah, honesty for sure. Boundless energy, unconditional love. And you hear that term used a lot, but I think it is vital. If your child is struggling, don't be critical, be loving. If your child has done something wrong, don't judge them, love them.
So you said boundless energy. From where do you derive your boundless energy?
Well, I don't feel like I have it. I feel like it's required, and it's a thing that would be a great attribute for a parent. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I feel like I have it. I think, you get energy, you get physical energy from making sure that you sleep right, eat right, exercise right. And I have by no means been good at those things, but I do try. I make an effort about all of them all the time. You also get it though from doing things that you're passionate about and that you care about. And so if you are in a career that you don't like, it's going to drag you down. You'll never have energy at home if when you go to work it drains you.
Yeah.
If you are doing things you love, you'll never feel like you're working, and you'll be willing to do them all day long, and you just feel like you've got energy to spare because so much of our energy is psychological. And so I think being honest with yourself and your partner and your kids about what you like and what you don't like and what you're good at and what you're not good at, and making sure that you spend your time and energy doing things you love will create energy for you that you'll have energy to spare.
So if you were going to write a book about your life as a parent, what would be the title of some of the chapters?
Whew. I think the topics we just touched on would be critical themes in terms of honesty and unconditional love. I think I'd probably have to put in there chapters on grief, chapters on supporting your kids' dreams, and certainly a chapter on being a good spouse. Being a good parent is secondary to being a good spouse. If you and your wife don't support one another, and in your marriage and in your parenting styles, it will show through and your kids will suffer from it. So I think that might be a big chapter.
Yeah.
Because, when you get into a marriage, you don't get everything you want out of the deal. It's a partnership, and therefore you have to make some compromises, and you have to do things that are not natural to you, and you have to think of someone else before you think of yourself. So all those attributes in parenting are even more important in marriage. And I'll add one more thing to a question earlier. When this is an observation that Julie and I had, and shared with others along the way, that as we hired people in the real estate company, we started to notice something, and that is those people who had been parents were better managers than those who were not, who had not been there. And that maybe is not a universally perfect statement, but you could notice they had more patience, they had more tolerance, they were less judgmental, they were more able to mentor people. And we noticed enough of these to say it's a thing.
They're leaders.
Yeah.
Parents are leaders.
Parents are leaders, and they're empathetic, and you get wisdom out of this parenting thing. And that wisdom applies to every other thing you do in life.
Is there a TV dad that you like or might find yourself comparable to? Or that your kids might compare you to?
I can't say Bill Cosby anymore, can I? No.
You can say, on the show you can. Matt said that.
It's a great question. I don't think I watched enough TV and I don't have a good enough recall of the things I did watch. Maybe I'm so old now that I can't remember those things. Steve Martin, I think, did Parenthood, didn't he? Or Fatherhood, or one of those movies.
The Father of the Bride.
No, this was the one.
Parenthood. He did Parenthood, I think.
I remember a line from that movie where, actually I don't remember the line. I remember the topic of the line was something like, life, you can choose to take the Ferris wheel or the merry-go-round, the roller coaster or the merry-go-round. And it was essentially saying life with me was the roller coaster. And as a father, I just remember, mostly as a spouse with Julie, she got the roller coaster as opposed to the merry-go-round. But gosh, dads in film or television shows, I'm going to have to pass on that one. I just don't have good enough recall.
So if you
how about this? Brady Bunch. He did a good job. All seemed to, anyhow.
So if you had the capacity to give a physical gift to all fathers, what gift might you give them?
A physical gift.
Mm-hmm.
A dog. No, let's see. A physical gift. I mean, the things I would give them would be time, money. I can't think of a. Sorry, I haven't. I'm at a loss. Can't think. I'm not a material person, so I can't think of a material thing that matters to me or that has made a difference in parenthood. But maybe a nice piece of property so that your kids, a good neighborhood, that would be it.
I think that's great.
A good neighborhood so your kids can grow up with other kids that are also in loving households.
Wonderful. So Tim Ferriss, who hosts the podcast, often asks his guests, what message would you put on a billboard? So I'm going to assume, I'm going to ask you the same question, but all that's on 95 are a bunch of dads in their cars driving. What would you put on that billboard, that message, that piece of advice?
Go home.
I love it. I love it. I think that's perfect. I think it's time for us to go home.
Beautiful.
So thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
What a hoot. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you. And I wish you luck in kicking this thing off.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.